Welcome, everybody. Let's get started. I got a lot of stuff I want to talk about. For those who haven't met me, I'm Dan. I'm a VP of new products here at Reforge. I've been here for 6.5 years now. I've done a little bit of everything, and I'm the one leading our work on the Reforge extension. And I'm so excited to show you some of the cool stuff we've been working on over the past couple months. And so I don't want to get into too much of exactly how the product works. I want to talk about how we built it and how we're applying AI. But the agenda for today is that we're going to be talking about the improvements we made in chain of thought and also how we were inspired by some of the things that we saw from one of Anthropic's system prompts. Second, I want to talk about how we doubled our attention with our most latest feature. And the third one is how we're using AI in some of our marketing efforts. Before we get into that, I just want to show the Reforge extension because I think it's incredibly helpful to ground what it does. And if you want to understand how we're going about improving it, I think it's helpful to understand what it does and how it works. So with that, just show you real quick. The Reforge extension is a browser extension. And just the same way that GitHub Copilot and other engineering copilots work, the Reforge extension integrates seamlessly into your browser. It works in Notion, it works in Google Docs, it works in Microsoft Word, it works in Confluence, it works in all the tools that people use in their day-to-day basis, because for everyone who's not a software engineer and who's not using an IDE to write code. And it's really easy to use. There's a Reforge button in the bottom right of the screen. You can click it and you can get a ton of great help. It can help you get started. It can give you feedback, help you think through what to do next. It can give you some strategic feedback, and also can show you how other people have done similar type work from the collection of artifacts we have on the Reforge platform. So the idea here is that this tool is available in Google Docs and Notion. And the amazing thing is that because it's in your browser, it can read the contents of what's in your documents, and you don't have to copy and paste back and forth. It can just see everything that you're working on and interact with the contents. My favorite feature is our Jira integration, and it acts like an engineering manager over your shoulder. Most of the time, I think I know the things that it's telling me, but I ultimately forget. And so it really helps me make sure that I don't shoot myself in the foot when I'm working with teams about how things should be built, some of the considerations, where the trade-offs can be made, and how we want to measure success of a feature, because I think that oftentimes dictates a lot of the implementation of that work. So again, the idea here is that we want to seamlessly integrate in all the tools that people use every day in their browser, and we want to use AI to help them do better work. And all of this stuff is grounded in the content on the Reforge platform. So specifically, all of our educational courses, we have guides, and also we have real-world examples of how other people have done similar work. And so you can link through directly from a suggestion to items on the Reforge platform that's grounded in the specific topic that the suggestion is written for and the content in your document. With that, enough of demo. I want to showcase how we made it a lot smarter. Oh, and just as a reminder, this is available for free. You just go to reforge.com/extension. It's better with a paid Reforge membership, but you can use it for free. And we also have another blog post that talks through a lot of the tech stack that we've used to build this, and a lot of and it covers the evolution of it. So you can go back, it's on our blog, and we have a YouTube video with another webinar just like this. Okay, let's get into how we made it smarter using chain of thought and some best practices from Anthropic. In our last session, we talked about how in the top left here, this is just a simple flow diagram of how our RAG worked. And one of the interesting things at the time was that the LLM was really not able to distinguish between the type of feedback that you'd want for one type of document or another. And it just showed the limitations of the state-of-the-art models of the type of feedback they could give. And so the big change that we did to make it better is that we introduced a step where we detected the type of document that someone was working in, and then we told the LLM give feedback that's appropriate for that type of document. And so for this round, we really haven't changed the fundamental architecture too much for one of the flows in our app, but we've really dialed it in. And in this flow diagram, when a user clicks help me improve my document, the first thing we would do is we would classify their document into things like a PRD, a persona, tech spec, the results of an experiment. These are all different types of documents that have different lenses you should evaluate the document from. And so we wanted to think through, how do we detect more types of documents? And also, how do we improve the suggestions? Once we know what type of document it is, then we think, what would an expert suggest? Because we have a wealth of knowledge from the Reforge platform, we have great insights into, given type of document, given what someone is working on, how would an expert evaluate that type of document and the content in this person's doc. An example of what we did previously, we just detected 13 document types. And this is actually the prompt we used in the LLM to do the classification. And so you can see here we did user persona, job description, PRD, roadmap, strategy, timeline. There's just 13. And one of the things we did is we went and built 180 different types of documents that we felt like we had the good content for and that made sense to have a branch for. Once we had each of those 180 types, then what we did is we went through and we mapped for each one the specific content we felt was most relevant and applicable so that we could ground our suggestions in the content sourced from whatever that asset was from Reforge. And so this is not sexy work. And I actually think this speaks to some of the challenges of building AI products today. It used to be that I think if you looked at any given task, it would slot nicely into product management, design, engineering, data, user research. I think the thing that's so interesting about developing all these AI tools is that a lot of these things blend together, and that to do work just like this, you really need to have an understanding of the trade-offs, speed, cost, and quality of the responses. You need to understand how to evaluate the quality and the correctness of the output from the LLM. I've worked with a lot of engineers who say, I can build it. I just don't know if what it's spitting out is good and correct. And so I think there's a definite skill there. And then there's also, how does all this work nicely together from a product perspective? And so this is, I actually think I think a lot of people talk about prompt engineering, but I think there's a lot of interesting work here where it goes across disciplines. And so I think this is very unsexy work, but really critical and really important in developing some of these products. You can see it in how we focused on this and also in the quality of the suggestions we're now outputting from this process. So going back to this flow, we went from 13 to 180 different types of documents we detected at this step. And the next thing we were trying to think about was, how do we improve the suggestions that an expert would say if they were sitting over your shoulder and they were reviewing the doc? Going back to our V0 and our V1, for the 13 different document types, we wrote what we thought were good questions. But for this next iteration, we really brought some strategic thinking to it of what are the 9 different types of feedback using a framework that we created for this. And then how do we think through what are the right questions given that framework for all the different types of documents? And also, how do we think through what separates good and great feedback and questions for each type of document? So for each of those 108 documents, we really focused on thinking through how do we get to that next level of great suggestion. And here's a quick example. For a go-to-market launch, before, these were the questions that we had the LLM generate as if it was an expert reviewing your document. I really like this last one. Would the document be better if it described how it differentiates the product in a crowded market? Which I think is a reasonable, good question to ask, but a better question, the bottom one, is how effectively does our messaging highlight what sets our product apart from competitors? Are there specific competitive advantages that we should emphasize more? We really spent some time to think through what are the right questions to ask? How do we make them much more specific and actionable and less vague? We also worked on updating our prompts. Our old prompt was actually pretty short. This was the system prompt and this was the user section. And so one of these questions here, how effectively does our messaging highlight what sets our product apart from our competitors? That's the question that would show up here. But we have blown out our prompt. It is much more complicated now. And one of the things we're doing is we're asking the LLM to really think. This is where the chain of thought comes in. We want it to think through what it's going to do, how to evaluate it, and then articulate those suggestions. After we tell it to think, then we ask it to rephrase their harsh thoughts into tactical feedback. One of the user feedback points that drove us nuts was the feedback sometimes could be too generic and high level. And so we added this extra step to say, we have this amazing content in the Reforge knowledge base, but oftentimes it's much more helpful when the LLM goes one step further. Instead of describing that content, it helps them actually think through, how would I go about applying those concepts in my particular situation, given what's in my document? And then we also give it examples. So previously, we really didn't give it examples. We were doing zero shot, right? We were just saying, give it some feedback, given this question that an expert would ask about the content. Here, we're actually giving it a specific example. And for anyone who used the extension prior to September, you probably got feedback that talked about a feedback river. Set up a feedback river. And that concept is just talk to your users. You want a constant stream of feedback from your users about how they're using it, why they're using it, what they're frustrated by. And there's many different ways to get that feedback. And that's like the right thing to tell people to do. But we did not want that. We don't want it to mention feedback river. We want it to be much more actionable. You should set up user testing with people in person. You should do some online. You should send them an email. You should survey an app. Given the type of feature, given what your product is, there may be many different ways to get that information, but we need to give someone a much more actionable suggestion rather than set up a feedback river and maybe survey 10 people that don't complete the funnel. And then we also tell it what separates good and bad feedback. And again, the idea here is we want to help teams move faster, avoid common pitfalls, and we don't want to focus on grammar or wording mistakes or small details that won't change the overall narrative. So we've really spent a lot of time giving the prompt a lot of attention and iterating on it. We also gave it 20 examples. So previously we gave it 0 examples. We just hoped the suggestions would be good. Now we give it 20 examples for different types of documents. We give it a lot more examples of what is good and what is bad. And you can see here we say, implement a feedback river for continuous insights. I think that's generally the right thing to do, but a much better suggestion is contact 20 to 30 users who failed to register or who failed to complete the funnel. And then we also tell it to format it. And one of the key things here is, I like this section, take the most actionable part of the recommendation. And the idea here is we could have just said, and we did in the past, summarize this point. But one of the things that we felt was really helpful, given the user feedback we received, was that it needed to feel actionable. It needed to really pull people in. And something like a headline that said to set up a feedback river could feel generic across documents. Even if they should solicit feedback and they don't have any of those things in either of their documents, it makes sense to customize the feedback river and make it much more actionable. And for one feature, you may want to get 50 people to respond to an in-app survey. For another one, you may just want to set up 10 user interviews for people that don't complete a funnel. And so part of the goal here with the title is to make it feel actionable and crisp and concrete. There's a document internally that we looked at and we used for a lot of inspiration. And it was a sample PRD. And one of the things we looked at with it was, if we were going to review our own work or someone else's work, what kind of feedback would we give? And two of the things that we felt were that someone could say, given this work, is that your goals are to change the perception of people signing up for Reforge. We want them to understand that there's a lot of events happening at Reforge. And when you buy a membership, you get exposed to a lot of those things. And a bunch of the rationale for why they wanted to build this feature wasn't crisply articulated. And the metrics, whether it was qualitative feedback or quantitative metrics after the feature was launched, weren't explicitly mentioned in this document. So they could have just said, we want to qualitatively measure the impact by talking to users. And the metrics are important here. I don't think for everything you ship, you're going to be able to say, I conclusively increased revenue. But you want some ability to say, I want to influence this input metric, which I believe will then influence the metric that we ultimately care about, revenue or customer satisfaction or whatever it is. And the example of how this would have been done before is we would have said, establish a feedback loop. And sorry, we don't have the screenshot, but it would have said, like the suggestion would be to establish a feedback loop, and then it would explain the value of collecting user feedback. And once we've made these changes, we do a much better job of detecting our document and also being much more specific and actionable. One of the suggestions on this document now is measure conversion rate from free to paid users. And it may be that you want to measure the conversion rate from free to paid, but there may be something else. It may be an input metric that you think will impact that metric. And then for qualitative feedback, it's a really good suggestion to survey 10 or 15 free and paid users to refine the messaging and features. So it might be people that did register for an event or did not register for an event. And the reason I think these are so valuable when you're writing your PRD is it really helps you think through, what's my goal? How likely do I think we're going to hit it? And depending on what we ship, I want to make sure I can improve upon it. And so these suggestions, I think, highlight we do a better job of detecting the type of document. And then we're also trying to make much more actionable and specific recommendations that don't feel as generic. Those were just a couple of the improvements that we made that focused on the intelligence. Next, I want to talk about how we doubled retention with a single feature change. So I'm sure every person on this call is very familiar with a retention chart that looks like this. And it kills me every time I look at these charts. The huge drop off from their first week to subsequent weeks. And so just looking at this chart makes me sick. But I did what any good product person should do is I went and I surveyed all the people that signed up, that started using the Reforge extension, but then ultimately weren't active in the days and weeks since they first started using it. And I was blown away by the feedback that people gave. These are all peer user quotes. Everyone just kept saying that they forgot that it's there. Forgot I had it. Where do I reactivate it? This person said, I installed it and forgot about 3 minutes later. My memory is not what it used to be. And so you just see how crazy it is that people forgot about us immediately. And so this is actually a huge opportunity. This wasn't a problem. It's a huge opportunity. I'm sure I would have loved it if people didn't forget about us, but it was a huge opportunity because people still had the extension installed. They didn't uninstall the extension. And so you can see here, this blue line shows the people who have installed the extension and still had it installed. So our install numbers were going up. The green line shows people actively taking an action in the extension. And even though our total install base is going up, the number of users actively using it is flat to down. What did we do? A lot of it came out of the user feedback. People said they really liked the feedback they gave. They liked the feedback that the Reforge extension gave them. They just wished it would be more proactive in providing those suggestions. And so we ended up building a Grammarly type feature that would not too in your face, but would remind you at specific points where you could make improvements in your document. So this screenshot shows in Notion, you can see the little Reforge bubble tied to specific blocks in Notion. If you click it, one of these pop-ups shows up. And so the idea here was, let's get us out of the forgettable zone. It wasn't that people were uninstalling the extension saying they didn't like it. It was just that they forgot it. And so let's enable them to see it in a way that's not too intrusive. So I want to talk through how we went about doing this. I was reflecting on this morning, and a key insight is that GPT-4o Mini was key to launching this feature. And there's people talk about 3 variables when you're launching an AI product, talk about speed, quality, and cost. And I think GPT-4o Mini was important it was a breakthrough across these 3 areas. It was fast. We wanted to be able to show the suggestions fairly quickly once someone loaded their document. It had to produce good suggestions. There's a big gap between 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4o Mini. And so the quality of the intelligence of the model was able to provide much better suggestions than if we use 3.5 Turbo. And also adhered to our JSON spec of what the extension expected in terms of data, much better. And it's an order of magnitude cheaper than GPT-4o. And just comparing and contrasting with GPT-4o and GPT 3.5 Turbo, 4o is smart enough, but it's actually smarter than 4o Mini, but it was slow and it was too expensive. We could not have done this, have generated suggestions on every single document by default. It would have cost too much. And so 4o Mini enabled us to do this in a way that just wasn't possible before. And 3.5 Turbo was cheap enough, but it wasn't smart enough. And so 4o Mini was the sweet spot for us. And I always talk about how I think you want to be building for the model that's going to be coming out 6 months or 12 months from now, not the models that are out today. Because if you build for today's level of intelligence, your product will be obsolete in just a couple of months when they come out with the new model. We talked about how we're inspired by the chain of thought from Anthropic's model. I know Anthropic has started publishing their system prompts for Claude. I don't think they've published the system prompts for artifacts, but someone said they're able to get the system prompt. And so I've highlighted a couple of sections I think are really interesting. They have this one section in their prompt where you don't actually see this output in Anthropic's Claude or in their artifacts. But what it does is it just thinks. And so it writes out what it's thinking about in the response. And we've definitely seen better suggestions by doing something like this. And there's a reason that they include this and they have it output this stuff. It's because as it's thinking, it's going to think through you're going to get better predictions. You're going to get better tokens that you predict next because you have the LLM think about what it's doing, why it's doing it. And so here's the section where it says, think for one sentence about how it evaluates against criteria for a good and bad artifact. And then you can see here's the actual example that it provided. So we were inspired by that. And so we built our own element like this in our prompt. And as I was writing this, I had to actually try and get it to be mean. I started off saying, give constructive feedback, and it just wasn't hitting the mark. And so I had to say, be critical and harsh about how the doc has a lot of filler words that don't mean much, isn't specific enough, doesn't have the team thinking big enough, and how the team isn't holding themselves accountable enough to specific metrics. They're not being honest with themselves, and they need to hear the honest truth that people are afraid to tell them. So I felt like I really had to put some obnoxious stuff in here to get it to just do the thinking. This isn't to actually output the suggestion. This is to get it in the right mindset, to think through how to evaluate their document that then informs those suggestions. And in addition to that, we also, as I was talking about before, we now provide 20 different examples of the type of a hypothetical sentence and like something that someone could easily write, and I've probably written a million times, is our retention numbers are not keeping up with our goals. And the example here might be state the specific metric that isn't performing well and its value. And then we have the description of reinforce your critical metrics by saying the specific metric and how far off target you are. Our net revenue retention is 35% and our goal is 40%. So we're on track to miss our revenue goals by 5 million. That's the kind of thing that I think an expert would hold me accountable to. And so that's why we include it as an example here of this is the lazy version of the sentence that someone could write in their document where they say, we're not hitting our goals. And it's like, no. State what your goal is, state how far off your goal you are, and what the impact of that is. That's the A+ version of what could be in your document, but you're not living up to that yet. And so that's what we did here for some of our suggestions. And this is a similar example from Anthropic, from their artifacts, from the Claude artifacts feature that talks through, you can see here, there's a doc string, there's an example. So here's the user query. Can you help me create a Python script to calculate the factorial of a number? And it does some thinking, creating a Python script, blah, blah, blah. And then it actually has the metadata that they probably use to display artifacts in Claude. So we modeled what we did heavily off of this, and it really improved the suggestions a lot. From a tech perspective, there was a huge challenge to insert the suggestions at the point it was most applicable. A lot of the feedback that we received was that this feedback these suggestions are good, but I need to know exactly where in my document I should be doing this. And so in order to land this new feature, we had to map the suggestion directly to a part in their document. And so you can see here, this is a screenshot of Notion. This is Microsoft Word Online. This is Google Docs. So we had to, in each of these different tools, we had to get access to the content of the document. And then when we sent our call to the LLM, we had to ask the LLM to ground the feedback to a particular point in the document. But we were able to do that where we would pass in an identifier for different sections of the document. And we would ask the LLM, we'd say, write the feedback and tell us the corresponding ID or identifier where we should explicitly show that suggestion in their doc. And one of our amazing engineers had to go in and figure out how to access the information in people's documents to support this feature, and then also modify the web pages in the person's browser to show the suggestion, do the highlighting, and also show the suggestion when they click on it, all without interfering with the way that Google Docs, Notion, and Microsoft Word works. This was a huge engineering effort, and a lot of it was specific to the individual tools that people are using. And so I'm really proud of this feature. It just came out. We just rolled it out for Confluence today, actually. One of the things we did to evaluate the impact and the performance of this feature is we looked at retention. And so this is one view on retention that we look at, and it shows our weekly cohorts. And it's people who use a series of features for the first time, and then how well they're using that feature in the weeks afterwards. And you can see here that like average for week 1 retention was like around 11%. It bounced around holidays, feature launches, other things. But the first cohort that had access to some of these features more than doubled that week 1 retention value. And you can see if you look at the diagonal, this is a great plug for our retention and engagement course. If you're unsure what this chart is, we have a whole course dedicated to analyzing retention. But anyways, this diagonal represents a point in time. It's the beginning of September, the end of August when we rolled out these features. You can see here that it's basically the best retention value is in this week for almost every single cohort. And this speaks to the fact that people had the extension installed, they forgot about it. And by putting these suggestions into people's documents in a not too intrusive way, it's reactivated them and it's brought them back to becoming a weekly active user. So it's exactly what we wanted. We're still chipping away at this problem of being in the forgettable zone, but this was a huge step forward in helping us get from, I like it, I just forget about it, to, oh yeah, I like this and I use it on a much more frequent basis. Okay, last section, then we'll get to, I think we'll have time for Q&A, is we quadrupled our email click-through rates with one campaign. Okay, so we have this great feature in the extension that is draft different types of documents for people. And we have all the popular document types that someone would want, whether it's a PRD, a job description, career ladder, persona. We have a whole bunch. And people love this feature, but we were struggling to make people aware of it. And part of the thinking here was like, once people use it, on their particular, they put in an idea for what they want to do or what they're working on, and it generates a PRD or an analysis or a persona. They really like the output because the drafts are generated with their particular ideas and their unique context and a template and knowledge from the Reforge knowledge base. So it's like this great combination that is much better than just what ChatGPT or Claude can do on their own. But the challenge here was, how do we get people to actually see the value rather than just give them the sales pitch? And so what we did is we tried to go and show them. So I'm just going to show a quick example of what we did. This is VS Code. This is a Jupyter notebook. And before anyone says, oh, I don't know how to write code, anyone can write code now because all these AI tools can do it for you. And there's nothing complicated about the code that I have here. This might look intimidating, but it's really not. You could have GPT-01, or you can have OpenAI's latest model basically do this for you in 5 minutes. Anyways, what I do is let me find the right prompt. Sorry about this. I ask an LLM to generate an idea given someone's title, company name, and what their company does. And I just say, you're an expert. You want to generate a compelling, novel, and intriguing idea for companies to build. And your outputs will be to generate a sample PRD, thinking about actionable features that are specific and concrete, and tell about what it is, why it's important for users, and the critical North Star metric it will impact for the company. So I basically, that was my really crappy prompt of give me an idea. And then given that idea, then I said, generate a PRD for that idea. And then what I did is I said, write an attention-grabbing subject line that summarizes that idea, that PRD. And I gave it some examples like Xbox's new AI companion helps solve hard levels. Asana's newest project agent does your work for you. And the new auto reservation system for Yelp is a game changer. And then I asked it to convert that PRD into HTML so I could include it in a marketing email. And then I have it output as a CSV. Once I have that, I loaded it into our email automation system. And it's as simple as saying, insert the subject line. So for me, it says that Reforge's interactive learning paths redefine your career growth journey. And I have my PRD here. And so I could generate this for any number of people. And we did it for thousands of users, and we sent out many different campaigns. And we saw our open rates, they were fantastic, and our click-through rates were amazing. They were 4x, 5x what our standard click-through rates were. And I think it was all because we were making what we were trying to get them to be aware of and use was much more contextualized and personalized to their circumstance. They didn't have to take that leap of faith of, how would I actually use this feature? How would I apply it to my context? It would say, it can only be better if you were to give us a little bit more information about what you're actually working on and why you're working on it. That works really well. And then we said, how do we automate this so that it's not this Python script that has to run and then we have to do a bunch of manual work? And so we built a Zap. And so we built a Zap that anytime someone does a search for particular terms on Reforge, what we do is we get some metadata about them. We filter out a bunch of stuff. And then we, based on the term, so if they search for PRD or a positioning doc or roadmap or vision narrative, we do exactly what I did in my Jupyter notebook, where we create an idea, create a doc, create a subject line, create the email, and then we go and send it in our email marketing system. So anytime, if you're on the Reforge platform right now, just go do a search for PRD. And within a couple of minutes, you're going to receive this email customized with the context that you have on the Reforge system about your role, your company, and what your company does. So we've seen phenomenal results with this. I'm surprised that it's not easier to do this today. This was a fairly complicated Zap, but I think this will only get easier over time. And I just keep thinking there's so much opportunity for every company out there to not. I mean, I receive so many bland emails, and it feels lazy at this point that companies aren't telling me we launched all these new features, and this is why it's relevant to you, and this is how you could use it for what you're doing, given the information they already know about me and the metadata that they have about me. I'm hopeful that my emails will start getting better and that other companies will do stuff like this, because I don't think this is that complicated and that sophisticated. I think the expectation will be everyone does stuff like this in the not too distant future. So, we had an 100% open rate on this email and a 14% click-through rate, which is like mind-boggling. And so I hope that other people see similar success like we did on this. With that, we have a couple minutes left. I'd love to open it up for questions. Ben, Apollo, do you want to help with surfacing any questions?
First, Robert asked just to describe a little bit more about the level of effort you use in fine-tuning the content.
Let me take one step back. One of the things I did not say that I should have is that we do not store any of the contents of your documents, the questions you ask of the extension, and we don't store any of our responses. So this should pass the security clearance of almost any company that wants to use it. One of the things we do is for internal Reforge employees, we log the results of what people are using and getting suggestions on, and it's all Reforge content. And so one of the things we do is we use this tool Adeline to evaluate our prompts, as well as the context that we're passing into the LLMs and the responses. And Adeline is really helpful where you can define data sets and you can define rules. Like we want to have at least one Reforge reference in every response, or we want to make sure that for this type of document that it mentions X or Y or Z. So you can have some sort of automated tests for things like your classification engine or the responses or whatever it is. And one of the things we use it for is we can experiment with what context we send in from the Reforge knowledge base. And we can experiment with saying, let's pass in all, or let's run similarity search on the user's document or their question against the Reforge knowledge base. And we can experiment with filtering things in or out to see what produces the objectively best type of response. There's a huge opportunity to provide the best recommendations, and a bunch of that is looking at the user's company context, their role, what's in their document, what the right context and content is to reference when thinking about recommendations to them. So we're still not that sophisticated, but tools like Adeline and other ones really help us experiment with different prompts as well as passing in different context from our knowledge base, as well as other information that we can glean from the user from their personalization settings.
Amazing. Keeping on this topic, we'll quickly go to Shannon's question. I think Shannon might have left the chat, but how did you measure the quality of the output in the wild? Did you look at user feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down, etc.? And are we using LLMs to grade it all as well?
Yep. So we don't store any user data. So there's no fine-tuning training on customer data at all. So I just want to say that 10 times in a row. One of the things that we do is we survey users. So because of that, that is 100% a limitation, but I think it's the right choice for us as serving businesses. Businesses are very concerned about the information that the tools have access to. And so by not saving any of that, not using any of that for fine-tuning and training of models, it allays a lot of concerns. Because of that, we need to find signal about how good our responses are in different ways. And so we survey users who churn, asking them for reasons why they churned. And again, that'll be fairly generic, high level. Another thing we do is we've recently added thumbs up and thumbs down throughout the app. So we get thumbs up and thumbs down on Jira suggestions. We get it on inline suggestions as well as in the sidebar. And I've been pleasantly surprised. I think today the thumbs up, thumbs down rating on the inline suggestions is 90%. I think that's skewed, but I'm very happy that it's that high. One of the things I've been thinking about is, are there ways in which we can, when someone clicks thumbs down, is there something we can do to prompt them to say what wasn't good about this? Share as much information as you want while reminding them that it's really hard for us to debug a thumbs down because we can't actually see their document, the suggestion, or any of the context that they gave it. So enabling the user on an individual basis to give us the context that'll help us understand how to improve the prompts, the context, all that stuff.
Katie asked, what was the size of the team that executed on what you showed today, and what types of roles did it comprise of?
Sure. There were 3 people on the team through mid-June, and then we added me, a designer, and 1 engineer. And then in July, we added another software engineer and another person who's a hybrid person, kind of like me, who's Ben, who's focusing on marketing as well as helping us improve the intelligence. So a little bit of everything. And I think that speaks to the like, it's not like, oh yeah, we just add another engineer. We add another X or Y. I think there's a lot of gray area about how you improve this, and having an understanding of what good looks like is really helpful. So now we have a team of 5. I'm really excited. Our pace has definitely improved. I think we're really moving fast, but we were able to build a lot of this with just 3 people.
And then going to some strategy questions. We have a question from Vladimir and a question from Kristen that are related. Vladimir asked, what do you see as the next level for the extension, apart from expanding the number of templates? And Kristen asked, what's your strategy to compete with Notion AI? So how are we thinking about the long-term viability of the product?
Yeah, we actually had some great slides in here, but I cut them just so we didn't go really long. Some of the more tactical things we're thinking about doing next are thinking about the life cycle of a document. You go from like a blank document to notes to maybe a draft, you share it with people, and then it's old. And the extension right now does not detect any of that. It gives you suggestions no matter what state it's in. And so helping the extension get a sense of where a document is in its life cycle, and I think will be really helpful. And I think there's different use cases we want to serve given the different stages of a document. And then we have bits and pieces of this, but thinking through, we use this term altitude of there's the 30,000 foot view, which is like, why are you even doing this? Should you be writing this document? Think through that from that perspective. And then there's the much more tactical thing of you should be doing this. You don't have a plan you should go survey the people that drop out of the funnel. And so just thinking through the various levels of altitude and making the extension smart enough to know where is it on its like timeline, the life cycle of a document, and what are the various levels of altitude at all those different stages. So I'm really excited to take a stab at that in the not too distant future. And then in terms of strategy, I think a lot of the tools that are out there, like a Notion or even something like Atlassian has, these tools are trying to be all things to all people. Notion is like over 100 million users, I believe. And so people use it as a note-taking app. They use it for enterprise wikis. I think it's really hard for them to solve for specific use cases really well because they're inherently building product for so many people. And so I think our focus is on people at tech companies. So product managers, marketers, designers, people in data. And so we think we can do a better job of solving for those personas. And I think there's also power in we're across all your tools. And so we can have a better view of all the things that you're doing across your BI tool, your analytics tool, your project management tool, your documentation tool. So it seems clear to me that we can provide the best experience for a significant and valuable niche. And that's where Reforge is focused today. But I think there's a path to having be that for a bunch of different niches and be the place that sources expertise. I also just don't think that Notion doesn't have their own content library. They don't have a network of experts. And so we can be that vertical specific tool that works in all the tools that you use. And we also have a network of experts that want to contribute their expertise and bring that knowledge to bear as you're doing your work. That's a high level strategy and thought around it. But we'll see what happens.
We have a duo of questions from Manoj. The first one is around, do we consider other models outside of OpenAI like Llama? And how do we objectively value whether or not a prompt and a response is good?
So one of the great things about this tool, Adeline, that we use is that picking a different model is as easy as just like checking, like switching one thing. So I can switch between Gemini, Claude, OpenAI. We did a bunch of testing with Grok and on Llama models. We could host our own. So the way I think about the product that we're building is we don't want our customers to worry about which LLM we're using, as long as we say none of your data will be saved or shared, trained for any other future purposes. They don't care what model we use. And so we can abstract away all of the questions of which model should I be using? How do I do all the prompt engineering? And it's our job to continually experiment with all the models that come out and look to optimize the quality of the suggestions, the speed, and the cost. And so we're constantly looking to see where we can get faster inference or lower costs. And I'm very curious. I'm still waiting for Grok to come out with their 4 or 5 billion parameter model of Llama 3.1. One of the things we haven't done enough of is have a data set to say, given a document, given suggestions, what are the right things? I think we could even have an LLM grade the quality of the responses. This is clearly missing from this document, or this is clearly missing. We really don't have our validation data set yet. Up until this point, it's been mostly qualitative high-level feedback from users and things like our thumbs up, thumbs down ratings. But I think moving forward, we need to be better at having our own objective test data set and then expanding that over time to say, as we experiment with different models and different families of models, we could, given our own unique document test set from Reforge, we could evaluate the success using internal people at Reforge as well as people external to Reforge for a sense of which one is better than another. We're not doing any of that stuff yet, but I'm hopeful that we'll get to that once we exhaust a lot of the low-hanging fruit that we're still working through.
Great. And then we also got a question about cost. How did you think about and calibrated the costs?
Luckily, we're building something new. We don't have an install base of millions of users, and the cost has not been an issue for us yet. And I generally think that's an advantage for startups because they can figure out what the state of the art is. They can build for that, and the costs are only going to go down. When we started doing this, GPT 3.5 Turbo was not smart enough. It would work from a cost perspective, but it wasn't smart enough. GPT 4.0 was too expensive. But in July, they literally released a model that was close to the intelligence level of 4.0, and it was an order of magnitude lower cost. And I see a lot of companies making the AI features a paid add-on, and I think that's 100% wrong. I think you should be making the investment in having users have access to this stuff for free because it will increase adoption and increase usage so that, and then build premium features on top of that. But I think it's short-sighted and you're just going to limit the usage of premium features if you make people pay to use these AI tools because it's only going to get orders of magnitude cheaper as the technology gets better over the coming months and years.
And then it looks like our final question from Kristen. For the responses that include specific numbers for customers to interview or survey, are you doing any type of power analysis to determine the recommended numbers?
No, that's 100% something that we could do. At this point, we're just trying to get people to think through that stuff. One of the things I'm very excited to try and get to is to not just provide suggestions, but to help people go act on those suggestions. And that's a clear instance where if we could plug into your surveying tool or if we could send an email for you, I do think we'd want to help the person think through what will be statistically significant. Or sometimes if you're at a smaller company, you're either not going to hit that or you just want some qual data. And so thinking through when the type of company where it would be applicable, where you should do some calculations to figure out how many people should I survey versus a small startup, you're going to hit diminishing returns at 10 or 20 user interviews. And having the right context to differentiate between those two, and then also think through how we can help people do those things. I think that's something that we're thinking about how we can do that effectively.
Yeah, I would actually add one more thing to that too. I think when we think about the steps that we want the LLM to go through for this type of thing, it's like one, determine that the user needs to do user research of some kind. Two, use the Reforge material to figure out what kind of user research that is. Is it a survey? Is it interviewing people? Is it a focus group? Is it an A/B test, et cetera, what the right type of test is? And then we have a ton of case studies in the Reforge material around what appropriate numbers are for those types of things. To Dan's point, we could add a power analysis at some point, but even getting to that step is a big benefit to our users in them actually starting to talk to customers in general. And I think that is our last question.
Thanks so much, everyone. If you have any questions or feature requests or anything I can help with, please send me an email at dan@reforge.com. I'd love to hear where the extension does well or does not do well. I'd love to hear your feedback. And thanks so much for attending and for helping us make the Reforge extension better. Thanks.